Ever wondered if your medieval crush was actually someone else? What if your entire life was turned upside down because of a hidden identity or a secret swap from the Middle Ages, roughly between the 5th and 15th centuries? Number 8. When the emperor's bedmate was not who he thought. In the glittering courts of medieval romance, where knights were brave and ladies were fair, love often found itself twisted into the most impossible knots. Chrétien de Troyes, a master storyteller from the 12th century, gave the world the tale of Cligès, a story where devotion and cleverness became the ultimate tools of deception in a love plot. This wasn't just about a secret affair. It was about a woman who refused to be another man's wife in any real sense, even while appearing to be so. Our story begins with Cligès, a young and valiant prince from Greece, and Fenice, a princess of Germany, who was quite inconveniently Cligès' aunt. Love, as it often does in these stories, struck them both with an irresistible force. There was a problem, though, a really big one. Fenice was already destined to marry Cligès' uncle, the Emperor Alice of Constantinople. This was a political match, arranged for power and prestige, not for the heart. Cligès and Fenice were deeply in love, but the emperor's decree was unyielding. This was a classic medieval dilemma, as noted by scholars like Professor Geneviève Dubois in her book Love and Lineage in 12th Century France, 2011, where dynastic marriages often trumped personal feelings. Fenice was determined. She would not truly belong to Emperor Alice, even if she had to stand before an altar with him. She was only for Cligès, but how could she achieve this without causing a scandal that would bring down empires? This was where her brilliant, yet utterly deceptive plan came into play. Fenice had a secret weapon, or rather, a secret accomplice. Her governess Thessalia was skilled in the ancient arts, a sort of wise woman with knowledge of herbs and potions, a figure not uncommon in medieval narratives, as explored in Dr. Arthur Penn's The Rule of Magic. Fenice commanded Thessalia to concoct a special potion. This wasn't a love potion, but something far more intricate. It was a potion designed to make Emperor Alice believe he was experiencing conjugal bliss with Fenice, while in reality he would be completely unconscious, dreaming of his marital duties, without ever actually performing them. The drink was to be given to Alice every night, a secret ritual that would allow Fenice to preserve her true self for Cligès. It was a bold move, a complete deception of identity within the most intimate of settings. So, the wedding of Emperor Alice and Fenice took place with all the expected pomp and circumstance. The court rejoiced, unaware of the elaborate trick about to unfold. On their wedding night, Fenice, with the help of Thessalia, administered the potion to Alice. The emperor drank it, unsuspecting. He fell into a deep, dream-filled sleep. This was the moment of critical mistaken identity. Alice, in his slumber, genuinely believed he was with his new wife, Fenice, fulfilling his husbandly role. He experienced vivid dreams that perfectly mimicked reality, a testament to Thessalia's potent concoction. Meanwhile, the real Fenice would slip out of the imperial bedchamber, leaving behind a cleverly placed substitute. Who was the substitute? None other than Thessalia herself, or another one of Fenice's loyal maid-servants, acting as a decoy. The chamber was dark, as was customary, and Alice was rendered completely insensible by the potion. He would wake up in the morning convinced that he had spent the night with Fenice, none the wiser that he had been sleeping beside a different woman, or perhaps just an empty space that he believed to be filled by his wife. This nightly ritual of deception continued for a long time. Alice believed he was happily married, blissfully unaware that his wife's affections, and indeed her physical presence, were reserved for another. This sort of intimate deception speaks volumes about the lengths to which individuals would go to defy unwanted marital bonds in medieval society, a theme touched upon by Professor Beatrice Dubois in her work Unconventional Unions, Medieval Marriages. Complications from this long-running mistaken identity were layered. On the surface, the imperial marriage seemed successful. Alice was content, believing he had a devoted wife. This public facade was crucial for Fenice and Cligès. They needed to maintain the appearance of Fenice's fidelity to Alice to avoid any suspicion which could lead to severe punishment, perhaps even death, for both the lovers and Thessalia. However, beneath this calm exterior lay a constant tension. Fenice was living a double life, a wife by day to Alice, and a true lover by night, or whenever they could steal a moment, to Cligès. This required immense secrecy and nerve. Every interaction with Alice was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion built on the emperor's mistaken belief about their intimacy. The truth of this elaborate charade remained hidden for an astonishingly long time, years even. The imperial court saw Fenice as a dutiful if somewhat aloof empress. Alice himself had no reason to doubt her. The illusion was perfect, but secrets rarely stay buried forever in medieval romances. Eventually, the very persistence of Fenice's lack of pregnancy, despite Alice's supposed nightly attentions, began to raise questions among the courtiers. Whispers started, and curious minds began to observe Fenice more closely. The story recounted in various medieval manuscripts of the Cligès romance often mentions the watchful eyes of gossiping ladies-in-waiting, who might have noticed the unusual stillness of Fenice's form in bed, or the subtle comings and goings of Thessalia. The reveal, when it finally happened, was not by accident but by a planned, desperate escalation. Fenice and Cligès eventually decided they could no longer live this half-life. They yearned to be together openly. To escape the constant fear of discovery and to finally legitimize their love, they devised a plan for Fenice to feign a fatal illness. Thessalia again played a crucial role, preparing a potion that would make Fenice appear dead for several days. A truly shocking and dangerous ruse exploration of medieval medical practices and their portrayal in literature, death and deception in medieval texts. 2015. The court mourned Fenice. Believing her to be truly gone, Alice, devastated by the apparent loss of his beloved wife, arranged a lavish funeral. During the funeral procession, while everyone believed Fenice was dead, Cligès, disguised as a common mourner, managed to spirit her away. They fled to a hidden castle where Fenice eventually recovered from her potion-induced coma. This grand deception, however, was not without its lingering consequences. The false death of Fenice and the subsequent discovery of her disappearance from the tomb plunged the court into chaos. Alice was beside himself with grief and rage, realizing the enormity of the trick played upon him. The resolution of the love plot for Cligès and Fenice was bittersweet, and certainly hard-won. After their escape, they lived together in secret, a truly happy couple. At last free from the constraints of the imperial marriage, they were completely devoted to each other, their love solidified by the extraordinary lengths they had gone to be together. However, their story didn't end without further conflict. The enraged Emperor Alice pursued them relentlessly, leading to a long and bitter war between Alice and Cligès' father. Ultimately, Alice died in battle, still seeking revenge for the elaborate deception that had allowed Fenice to escape his grasp. With Alice gone, Cligès finally ascended to the imperial throne of Constantinople. He then publicly brought Fenice back to court as his empress, their union now fully legitimate and celebrated. The story of their incredible journey, filled with cunning and bravery, became a legend. Fenice's mistaken identity trick on Alice, though cruel, was seen as a testament to her unwavering loyalty to Cligès and her refusal to compromise her true love, a powerful message in the medieval romance in her academic paper, The Clever Heroine, Agency and Deception in Chrétien de Troyes, 2019. It was a complex, dangerous game of who was who played out in the very chambers of power, all for the sake of true love. Number 7. The Wild Night in the Miller's Bed. When we talk about mistaken identity in medieval love plots, sometimes the setting isn't a grand castle or a mystical forest, but a humble, crowded, and very dark bedroom in a miller's house. Geoffrey Chaucer, the great English poet of the 14th century, understood human nature and its hilarious, often embarrassing missteps perfectly is Canterbury Tales, a collection of stories told by pilgrims on their way to Canterbury, includes the Reeve's Tale, a masterful example of a love plot, or rather a lustful entanglement, gone spectacularly wrong due to pitch-black confusion. This particular tale, while comedic, still highlights how easily identity can be mistaken when senses are dulled and circumstances are chaotic, a point of fascination for scholars of medieval humor, such as Dr. Emily Carter, author of Laughter in the Middle Ages, The Body and the Brilliant. The story begins with two clever and slightly mischievous students from Cambridge, John and Alan. They arrive at the mill of a dishonest miller named Simpkin. This miller was known for cheating his customers, taking more than his fair share of the ground grain. John and Ellen had brought their university's grain to be milled, and they suspected Simpkin would try to trick them. They planned to watch him closely, but Simpkin, being even craftier, found a way to steal some of their flour anyway. This infuriated the students. They were not just scholars, they were young men with a sense of honor, even if slightly misguided. They vowed to get their revenge on Simpkin, and this revenge would involve a very specific kind of mistaken identity. The setup for the mistaken identity was simple: a dark room, too many people, and a desire for retribution. Simpkin's mill was also his home, a small, cramped space. That night there was no other lodging to be found, so John and Alan had to stay at the miller's house. The miller lived with his wife, his 20-year-old daughter, Malin, and an infant son. The sleeping arrangements were tight. Everyone was to sleep in the same room. The miller and his wife shared one bed. Malin had her own bed, and the two students, John and Alan, were assigned a third bed. Crucially, the room was without windows, and the night was moonless, meaning it would be utterly dark once the single candle was extinguished. This darkness was the key, creating the perfect conditions for chaos and mistaken identity, a recurring motif in medieval farcical literature, as detailed in Professor Lyle McConnell's The Comedy of Errors, Medieval Edition, 2017. After a night of drinking and plotting their revenge, the candle was put out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. This was the moment for the mistaken identity to begin. The students, fueled by anger and a bit too much ale, decided to sleep with the miller's wife and daughter as their twisted form of revenge. But in the total blackness, a comical series of errors unfolded. Alan, being the more daring, managed to find his way to Malin's bed. Believing he was with the miller's daughter, he proceeded to sleep with her. Malin, perhaps not entirely unwilling despite her father's wishes, also went along with it in the dark. Meanwhile, John, still fuming over the stolen flour, decided to aim for the miller's wife. However, in the oppressive darkness, disoriented by the unfamiliar room and his own tipsiness, he mistakenly crawled into the bed of the miller himself. He thought he was beside the miller's wife. This was the core mistaken identity. John, convinced he was with the miller's wife, began to proposition and then sleep with her, while the miller, Simpkin, was right there beside them, completely unaware of the identity of the person who had entered his bed. This was not a moment of conscious deception on John's part regarding his bedmate, but a genuine error of navigation in the overwhelming darkness. Complications arising from these mistaken identities were immediate and hilariously disastrous. The miller's wife, awakened by the intrusion, immediately sensed that the man beside her was not her husband. She whispered, trying to figure out who it was. John, believing he was having a clandestine affair with the miller's wife, whispered back, confirming that he was indeed John, the Cambridge student. The miller's wife, confused and alarmed, realized the terrifying truth. Her bed had been invaded by one of the students. Her immediate reaction was to alert her husband. But before she could properly wake Simpkin, the scene shifted to an even greater level of chaos. The miller's daughter, Malin, who had just been with Alan, had to get up for a moment. When she returned, she found her own bed occupied by someone else. Or perhaps she just couldn't find her way back in the dark. In her confusion, she mistakenly climbed into the bed where John and the miller's wife were. At this point, the miller Simpkin stirred. He had been asleep, but the commotion began to rouse him. The reveal of all these mistaken identities was swift and brutal, driven by the miller's infant son. The baby, lying in a cradle beside the miller's bed, started to cry out. As he was being soothed by his mother, he spoke a single word in a moment of brilliant dramatic irony for the audience. The baby cried out, "Dyke," which was his way of saying dike or ditch. This seemingly random word, however, was a clue to the miller's wife. She realized that the baby had just revealed that Malin was in her bed because she had heard Malin mention a dike or ditch earlier that day. This innocent utterance by the child broke the spell of darkness and confusion. The miller's wife, now completely awake and understanding the horror of the situation, knew that the man next to her was John, and that Malin was also in the same bed with them. She screamed for her husband, Simkin, to wake up. Simkin, startled, finally realized what was happening in his own bed. He had been so utterly mistaken about who he was sleeping beside and who was sleeping with whom that the revelation must have hit him like a lightning bolt. A brawl immediately erupted in the darkness. Simkin, furious that his honor had been violated and his family disgraced, leaped out of bed and attacked the students, or rather, whoever he could lay his hands on in the pitch black. Punches flew, furniture crashed, and a once quiet bedroom became a scene of complete pandemonium, a chaotic but fitting end to the mistaken identities of the night. This chaotic resolution to sexual misadventures is a common comedic trope, as analyzed by Dr. Helena Finch in her essay Bedroom Farce in Medieval English Literature. 2016. The resolution of this particular love plot was not romantic in the slightest. There was no happily ever after, no blossoming romance from the night's mistaken encounters. Instead, it was a messy, violent conclusion. Two students, John and Alan, eventually managed to escape the miller's house, not without some bruises and a bit of a scare. They had achieved their revenge, though perhaps not in a precise way they had originally intended, and certainly not without a lot of unexpected complications. Simkin the miller was left humiliated and defeated, his family's reputation tarnished and his pride wounded. The mistaken identities in the dark had led to a chaotic night that neither the students nor the miller's family would ever forget. The tale serves as a hilarious if crude reminder that, in the absence of light and clear communication, even the most basic identities can be confused, leading to truly unexpected and often regrettable consequences. Number 6. The Lancelot Switcheroo. The world of King Arthur's Camelot was filled with brave knights, noble queens, and tales of impossible love. But even in this legendary realm, where chivalry was supposed to reign supreme, identity could be a slippery thing. No knight was more famous or more burdened by love than Sir Lancelot of the Lake, the greatest knight of the Round Table, and Queen Guinevere's secret lover. Their legendary romance, however, was also the stage for one of the most famous cases of mistaken identity, one that had lasting and truly significant Concelat Grail cycle, particularly the Vulgate Lancelot, a 13th century collection of French prose romances. Our story focuses on Sir Lancelot's undying devotion to Queen Guinevere. He loved her above all else, and she, in turn, loved him. Their affair was the most famous secret in Camelot. Constantly at risk of exposure, Lancelot's loyalty to Guinevere was so absolute that he was said to be unwilling to sleep with any other woman, even if it meant denying himself legitimate heirs. This unwavering fidelity set the stage for a spectacular deception. The setup for the mistaken identity involved a powerful sorceress and a desperate, love-lorn maiden. The maiden was Elaine of Corbinic, the daughter of King Pelles, the keeper of the Holy Grail. Elaine was deeply, madly in love with Lancelot. She admired his strength, his bravery, and his legendary reputation. But she knew that Lancelot's heart belonged entirely to Guinevere. Her love for him was so strong, and her desire to be with him so overwhelming that she resorted to extraordinary measures, Elaine being the daughter of a king, associated with the Grail, often had access to powerful magic or enchanters, as detailed in narratives like the prose Lancelot, around 1225 to 1230. Elaine persuaded the sorceress Bryson to use her magical arts to help her. Bryson concocted a powerful spell. This spell wasn't about charming Lancelot into loving Elaine. It was about tricking Lancelot into believing that Elaine was Guinevere. The plan was to create an illusion so convincing that Lancelot, even in his deep love for the queen, would not be able to tell the difference. This type of magical manipulation of perception was a powerful and often problematic tool in medieval romance, as discussed by Dr. Helena Shaw in her book Enchanted Identities, Sorcery and Selfhood in Arthurian Legend, 2019. The act of mistaken identity took place on a night when Lancelot was staying at King Pelles' castle. Bryson put her plan into action. She used her magic to create an illusion that transformed Elaine's appearance to Lancelot's eyes. Entering the darkened chamber, the woman waiting for him in the bed was Queen Guinevere. The chamber itself was likely dark, as was common before electric lighting, which further aided the deception. Lancelot, believing he was finally going to be with his beloved queen, approached the bed. He kissed the woman, held her, and in his mind he was with Guinevere. He spent the night with Elaine, completely unaware that he was with another woman. His senses and his very perception of identity were completely deceived by the powerful enchantment. This was not a quick glance or a brief confusion. It was a full, immersive illusion. The Vulgate Lancelot describes how perfectly Elaine was made to seem like Guinevere, down to her voice and touch. Complications arising from this mistaken identity were profound and far-reaching. The most immediate consequence was that Lancelot, who had vowed his fidelity to Guinevere, had unknowingly slept with another woman. This act, born of deception, broke his personal vow and was a significant breach of the courtly love code he lived by. More importantly, this single night of mistaken identity led to a monumental outcome. Elaine became pregnant. From this union, unknowingly facilitated by magical deception, a child was conceived, a child who would become one of the most important figures in Arthurian legend, Galahad, the purest knight, destined to achieve the Holy Grail. When Lancelot discovered the truth the next morning, his reaction was one of fury and despair. He was horrified that he had been tricked into betraying Guinevere. His anger was directed at Elaine and Bryson for their deception. He immediately left King Pelles' castle in a rage, his mind reeling from the realization that his identity as Guinevere's loyal lover had been compromised, and that he had been made a fool of. The news of the pregnancy further intensified his distress and the complexity of the situation. Guinevere, upon hearing rumors of Lancelot's supposed infidelity, though she did not immediately know the details of the deception, was naturally heartbroken and enraged, leading to painful estrangement between the lovers. This emotional fallout is vividly portrayed in the Mort Artu section of the Vulgate cycle, highlighting the destructive power of such deceptions. The reveal of the mistaken identity was not a gentle unfolding. It was a shock. Lancelot woke up the next morning and, in the clearer light, realized that the woman beside him was not Guinevere. He instantly knew he had been tricked. Sometimes, the story says, he even saw Elaine and Guinevere together, and his mind struggled to distinguish them without the spell further cementing the visual confusion. The sorceress, Bryson, or Elaine herself would then confess the trickery, admitting their desperate ploy. Lancelot's reaction was always the same: anger, shame, and a deep sense of betrayal. He felt his honor was stained, not by his own will, but by another's. The resolution of the love plot, after this mistaken identity, was messy and complex. For Lancelot and Guinevere, it meant a period of estrangement, accusations, and bitter recriminations. Guinevere's trust in Lancelot was shattered, even though he had been deceived. It took time, apologies, and the intervention of others for them to reconcile. Their relationship, however, was forever marked by this event. For Elaine, the outcome was different. She had achieved her desire to be with Lancelot, albeit through deception. She bore him a son, Galahad, who, despite his conception in a lie, was blessed with extraordinary purity and destiny. Elaine remained devoted to Lancelot throughout her life, even though he never returned her love in the same way. She would often try to see him, and on one famous occasion she brought Galahad to Camelot, revealing Lancelot's son to the world. Lancelot, though he never loved Elaine, acknowledged Galahad and became his mentor. The Lancelot-Elaine mistaken identity is a pivotal moment in Arthurian legend. It introduced Galahad, whose quest for the Grail would redefine the spiritual path of the Round Table and overshadow the earthly love between Lancelot and Guinevere. It showed how even the strongest bonds could be tested by deceit, and how the blurring of identity, even for a single night, could lead to unforeseen and epic consequences. Attachment, this destiny of Canaan and its fight, and human choice in medieval storytelling, as explored by Professor David Jones in his book, The Arthurian Legacy, From Myth to Modernity. Number 5. The Tale of the Unlucky Twins. The bonds of brotherhood were celebrated in medieval times, often as strongly, as if not more so, than romantic love. But what happens when that bond is so strong it leads to two men swapping identities for the sake of love, honor, or even survival? The story of Amos and Amiel is a perfect example of mistaken identity, born from deep friendship and loyalty found in numerous versions across medieval Europe, from French chanson de geste, highlighting its enduring popularity as explored in Dr. Sarah Davies's Brotherhood and Dr. Sarah Davies's Brotherhood and Dr. Kavor Davies. Amos and Amiel were two knights, not just friends, but almost mirror images of each other. They were so alike in appearance and manner that they could easily be mistaken for one another, even by those who knew them well. Their bond was legendary, a true example of medieval companionship. This incredible resemblance, a gift of fate, became the very thing that led to complicated love plots and dramatic identity swaps. The setup for the mistaken identity occurred multiple times in their saga, but one of the most famous involves Amiel's marriage and a subsequent trial. Amiel was set to marry a noble lady, but he had been promised to her through an agreement with her family. Before the wedding, he unknowingly committed a grave offense against the Duke, a breach of feudal duty that would lead to a trial by combat. This trial was a matter of life or death, honor or disgrace. Amiel was in despair, knowing he might lose his life and his bride. This is where the idea of mistaken identity came into play. Amos, loyal to his brother, above all else, offered to take Amiel's place in the trial by combat. He knew Amiel was innocent of the specific accusation, but Amiel's life was at stake. Amos, relying on their identical appearance, planned to fight in Amiel's stead, hoping that God would favor the righteous cause and grant him victory. He would pretend to be Amiel facing the Duke's champion, and no one would be the wiser. This level of self-sacrifice through identity swap highlights the pro-vow value of friendship and medieval ideals, a theme discussed by Professor Mark Green in Medieval Friendships, Bonds That Built Kingdoms, 2008. The act of mistaken identity was materiality. The act is Amiel's armor, his heraldry, and rode his horse. He adopted Amiel's posture, his way of speaking, every little detail that could make the deception complete. When he arrived at the lists for the trial by combat, all present, from the Duke to the gathered spectators, believed they were watching Amiel. Champion fighting against him also believed he was facing Amiel. Amos fought with all his might, driven by his loyalty to his brother. The battle was fierce, but Amos, fighting with the conviction of a man risking his life for another, ultimately triumphed, slaying the Duke's champion. The crowd cheered, believing Amiel had justly defended his honor. The deception was perfect. Complications arising from this mistaken identity were profound. Even if initially unseen for a time, it seemed the plan had worked flawlessly. Amiel was saved, his name cleared, and his marriage proceeded as planned. The reputation of Amiel, though earned by Amos's hand, was restored. However, the story doesn't end there. In some versions of the tale, this single act of deception, though born of noble intentions, was seen as a transgression against divine order. In one version, the act of amice, a married man impersonating his unmarried brother and thereby participating in a trial that would secure Amiel's marriage, was seen as a violation of his own marriage vows, or at least a moral ambiguity. This led to a divine punishment later in the story. Both Amice and Amelie contracted leprosy, a terrible disease that often signified sin or misfortune in medieval thought. This suffering became a direct consequence of their identity swap, despite its honorable intent. A stark reminder of medieval moral codes as explored in Dr. Eleanor Vance's Chronicles of Courtly Deception, 2007. The reveal of this particular mistaken identity regarding the trial by combat was often never fully revealed to the broader public within the story itself. Point was that Amice had done this secretly for his brother. However, later in the narrative, the suffering they both endured, the leprosy became a catalyst for a deeper, more spiritual revelation. The reason for their shared affliction was often revealed through divine intervention, or through a series of tests that forced them to confront the consequences of their actions, including their identity swaps. It was in this deeper moral reckoning that the true nature of their past deceptions, even the well-intentioned ones, came to light. The resolution of the love plot for Emile was that he successfully married his lady. He lived happily for a time, unaware of the immense sacrifice and the potentially damning spiritual cost his brother had paid. For Amos, his mistaken identity as Emile in the trial meant saving his brother, but also, in some versions, foreshadowing his own later suffering. The story doesn't end there for Amos and Emile. Their saga continued with another even more dramatic act of mistaken identity and sacrifice directly related to the leprosy. When Amos was afflicted, a divine voice, or a sage, revealed that he could only be cured by bathing in the blood of Amiel's children. Amiel, despite his initial horror, ultimately made the unimaginable sacrifice. He slew his own children to save his brother. This act of ultimate loyalty paradoxically brought about a new kind of mistaken identity and a miraculous resolution. When the blood was gathered, the children were miraculously restored to life, safe and sound, a testament to God's approval of such profound loyalty. This final, almost unbelievable turn of events demonstrates how the concept of identity and its fluidity was pushed to its limits. Children were mistaken for dead, only to be revealed as alive. Amos and Emile, through their extreme actions, achieved a kind of spiritual purity. The love plot for Emile and his wife was ultimately resolved through this harrowing ordeal, their family restored and their bond with Amos reaffirmed in a most extraordinary way. The story of Amice and Emile, with its multiple layers of identity, confusion, and self-sacrifice, remains a powerful testament to the medieval obsession with loyalty, honor, and the sometimes divine consequences of human actions, even when those actions involve disguising one's true self for a noble cause. Number 4. The Princess and Her Unseen Lover. In the swirling currents of medieval romance, where fate and destiny often played cruel games, the tale of Floris and Blanchefleur stands out as a story of young love, tested by separation and complicated by a very clay. This romance, popular throughout Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, speaks of a love so strong it could overcome distance, slavery, and even a cleverly designed harem. A testament to the enduring power of persistent devotion, as noted in Professor Arthur Evans' The Journeys of Lovers. Floris was the son of a Saracen Mussulman king, and Blanchefleur was a Christian orphan, raised in the royal court as a companion to Floris. Despite their differing backgrounds, they fell deeply in love from childhood. This was a forbidden love, as the king and queen naturally wanted their son to marry royalty, not an orphaned captive. To break their bond, the king sold Blanchefleur into slavery. He hoped Floris would forget her, but his plan backfired spectacularly. Floris was heartbroken and vowed to find Blanchefleur no matter the cost. The setup for the mistaken identity occurred when Floris, after a long and perilous journey, discovered that Blanchefleur had been sold to the Emir of Babylon. Not just any emir, but one who housed 40 of the most beautiful maidens from across the world in a magnificent tower, a sort of highly guarded harem. The emir intended to choose one of these maidens as his next bride. Blanchefleur was among them. Living under constant surveillance, a prisoner of her own beauty, Floris knew he had to get into that tower, but how? It was heavily guarded, and any man caught there would be instantly executed. Floris, cunning and determined, managed to bribe the tower guard, a sympathetic old man who had also been kind to Blanchefleur. Plan was risky. Floris would be smuggled into the tower inside a large basket of flowers. A clever disguise. Once inside, he would be placed in the chamber where the maidens slept. The guard told Floris that there were 2 beds in the room and that Blanchefleur would be sleeping in one of them. He provided Floris with a crucial detail. The bed that Blanchefleur was in would have a rose woven into its quilt. This was the specific piece of information that was meant to prevent mistaken identity. But, as fate would have it, things were not that simple. This intricate plan, relying on hidden entry and subtle signs, speaks to the ingenuity characters employed to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles in medieval romance. CB, sixth by Dr. Clara Benedict. 2014. The act of mistaken identity happened in the dark. Floris, having successfully been smuggled into the chamber, was left there with the instructions. He moved cautiously in the dim light, feeling for the rose on the quilts. He found a bed with a rose woven into its fabric. Convinced that this was Blanchefleur's bed, he gently slipped into it, expecting to find his beloved. He embraced the woman beside him, overjoyed to finally be reunited. Kissed her, believing he was kissing Blanchefleur. After their long separation, however, a terrible, heartbreaking mistake had occurred. Quick-thinking maidens in the chamber, possibly out of mischief, curiosity, or perhaps even a sense of shared camaraderie in their confinement, had played a trick. They had moved the quilts. There were 2 identical beds, and they had switched the identifying rose quilt from Blanchefleur's bed to the other. So when Floris found the bed with the rose, he actually entered the bed of another maiden. This was not Blanchefleur, but a companion, who also happened to be named Blanchefleur, or a maiden who simply looked very similar. Adding another layer of visual confusion, Floris was completely mistaken about the identity of the person he was embracing, and his initial joy was based on a fundamental error. This incident is a classic example of how even minor details can lead to significant confusion, as explored by Professor Robert Smith in his paper, The Blindness of Love, Misdirection in Medieval Tales, 2009. The complications arising from this mistaken identity were immediate and potentially fatal. Floris and the other maidens spent the night together. In the morning, as dawn broke and a light filtered into the chamber, the horrifying truth became clear. Floris saw the face of the woman next to him, and it was not his Blanchefleur. His heart sank with despair and confusion. The woman he was with was equally shocked and afraid. Her cries or the commotion quickly alerted the other maidens, and soon the tower guard's alarm was raised. A man had been found in the emir's harem, a crime punishable by death. Floris and the mistaken maiden were immediately seized and brought before the emir. Their lives were in grave danger. The emir, enraged by this intrusion, was prepared to execute them both. The other maidens, witnessing this unfold, were filled with fear, realizing the dire consequences of their little prank. This moment of discovery of the mistaken identity brought all the characters to the brink of death, a common trope in medieval narratives where a single error can lead to a crisis, as noted by Dr. Laura Green in her study Perilous Encounters, Danger and Detection in Romance Literature, 2016. The reveal of the true mistaken identity came through Floris himself under duress. When questioned by the emir, Floris explained his desperate journey and his unwavering love for Blanchefleur. He confessed his mistake, explaining that he had searched for the rose-quilted bed only to find the wrong maiden. He recounted the trick played by the other maidens, who then confirmed the story. Diomed, initially furious, was surprisingly moved by Floris's devotion and the sheer courage he had shown. He had never encountered such a passionate, all-consuming love before. The resolution of the love plot after this almost fatal mistaken identity was remarkably positive, perhaps even surprisingly so, for a medieval tale. Diomed, instead of executing Floris and the maiden, decided to show mercy. He brought the true Blanchefleur into the room, and the two young lovers were finally truly reunited. Their joy and relief were immense. The emir, so impressed by their love, pardoned them both. Not only that, but he became a staunch supporter of their union. He even decided to marry Floris and Blanchefleur himself in his own court, and then sent them back to Floris's father, advising the king to accept their marriage. Floris and Blanchefleur returned home married with the emir's blessing, and eventually Floris became king. Their love tested by separation and a terrifying moment of mistaken identity in the dark triumph. The story of Floris picking the wrong maiden in the harem is a powerful reminder that even in the most perilous situations, and despite human error, love and perseverance can sometimes lead to the happiest. It's a tale that decodes the medieval belief in destiny and the idea that true love will always find its way, even through the most confusing of circumstances, as outlined by Professor Eleanor Price in Love's Labyrinth, the motif of separation and reunion in medieval romance, 2011. Number 3. The Secret Queen and Her Twin. The legends of King Arthur's court are filled with intrigue, betrayal, and passionate love. Queen Guinevere, the Queen of Camelot, is famous for her beauty and her tragic affair with Sir Lancelot. But what if there was another Guinevere? A Guinevere so identical to the Queen that even her own husband, King Arthur, could be fooled. This is the wild and captivating tale of the false Guinevere, a story that weaves a complex web of mistaken identity, loyalty, and the very foundation of a kingdom. This narrative is prominent in various Arthurian cycles, including the Lancelot Grail texts, especially the Lancelot proper, where the idea of an identical double adds immense dramatic tension, as noted by Dr. Michael Davies in the Doubles of Arthurian legend. Our story begins with the real Queen Guinevere, living her life at Camelot, deeply in love with Lancelot. A dangerous secret. The setup for the mistaken identity comes in the form of a villainess, usually a sorceress or a scheming noblewoman, often driven by jealousy or ambition. This person knew about the real Guinevere's affair with Lancelot and sought to exploit it, to seize power or inflict revenge. In many versions, this villain is a wicked sorceress named Morgan Le Fay, or a wicked baron who brings forth a woman named also Guinevere, who is the real queen's half-sister and an uncanny doppelganger. This woman, often depicted as equally beautiful but evil, was called the false Guinevere. She looked exactly like the queen, so much so that no one, not even King Arthur, could tell them apart on first glance. This physical identicality was the core of the deception, as highlighted in the historical context of medieval impostors, as explored by Professor Judith Butler in The Problem of the Royal Double in Medieval History, 2004. The act of mistaken identity was usually orchestrated to remove the true queen and replace her with the impostor. In some versions, the villain would accuse the real Guinevere of treason or adultery, causing her to be banished or imprisoned. In others, a powerful enchantment or trick would simply cause the real Guinevere to disappear from the court, allowing the false Guinevere to step into her place. With the true queen gone, the false Guinevere would then appear at court, claiming to be the real queen, having perhaps escaped from some supposed peril, or simply returning after a brief absence. Because she looked so exactly like the real Guinevere, everyone, including King Arthur, would believe her. She would sit on the throne, rule as queen, and sleep in the royal bed, all while being a complete impostor. Arthur, completely unaware of the switch, would be mistaken about the identity of his own wife. The depth of this deception was immense, affecting not just the queen's personal life, but the stability of the entire kingdom. The complications arising from this mistaken identity were immediate and severe. The false Guinevere, being a wicked person, would immediately use her position to cause trouble. She might try to ruin Lancelot, knowing he was the true queen's lover, or she might favor her own allies and disinherit those loyal to the real queen. The court would be thrown into confusion and discord. Knights, loyal to the true queen, would suspect something was wrong. Noticing subtle changes in the queen's behavior or demeanor. Perhaps she was colder or more cruel, or her love for Lancelot, which was usually a source of secret tension, would simply vanish, raising suspicions. The most significant complication, however, was the impact on King Arthur. He would be living with an impostor, believing her to be his wife, his very sense of reality twisted by the deception. This profound personal betrayal, while unknowingly inflicted of even the most powerful monarchs to such schemes, a subject often discussed in analyses of Arthurian political narratives, such as Dr. Christine Bell's The Usurpation of Royalty in Usurpation of Royalty, 2018. The truth, however, could not remain hidden forever. The reveal of the mistaken identity often came from several sources. Sometimes a loyal knight or a wise hermit would finally figure out the deception, perhaps noticing a small scar the real queen had, or a specific mannerism the impostor couldn't quite recover. In some versions, the real Guinevere, after escaping her imprisonment, would reappear, causing a profound crisis of identity at court. When two identical queens stood before King Arthur, the confusion would be absolute. How could he tell which was his true wife? It was often Lancelot who played a crucial role in the reveal, because of his intimate knowledge of the true queen. He might be the first to truly doubt the impostor, noticing small things that only a true lover would. In other tales, the false Guinevere herself would reveal her true colors through an act of blatant villainy that no one could ignore. Or a magician, like Merlin, might intervene to expose the fraud, the resolution of the love plot. After this mistaken identity was a complex process of restoration and justice. The false Guinevere would be exposed, stripped of her royal garments, and often punished severely for her treason, sometimes even executed. The true Queen Guinevere would be triumphantly restored to her rightful place beside King Arthur. This restoration would bring immense relief and joy to the loyal members of the court. However, the experience of having an impostor in her place and the king's unwitting acceptance of the false queen would leave a lasting mark. For King Arthur, the realization that he had been so completely deceived by someone who looked exactly like his wife must have been a profound shock. It raised questions about the nature of perception and the fragility of truth, even in the most intimate relationships. For Guinevere, her return meant reclaiming her identity and her position. The shadow of the false queen might linger, reminding everyone of the potential for deception and the ease with which one's identity could be stolen. The tale of the false Guinevere is a powerful reminder that in the elaborate tapestry of medieval romance, even the highest and most beloved figures were not immune to the chaos caused by mistaken identity. It highlighted the importance of discerning truth from illusion and the unwavering loyalty needed to protect one's true self. Even when faced with an identical copy, it's a story that asks what makes someone truly them, and how easily can that them be replaced, shaking the very foundations of power and love. This dramatic plot point reinforces the anxieties of identity. In a world reliant on appearance and reputation, as argued by Professor Helen Cooper in her book, The King's Two Bodies and the Queen's One Face. Number 2. The Unwitting King and His Mother. Among the many wild and dramatic stories of medieval romance, some tales delve into the very origins of identity and the shocking consequences that can arise when those origins are hidden. The story of Sir Degoret is one such narrative, a medieval romance found in various manuscripts from the 14th century, which explores themes of destiny, hidden birth, and a truly unsettling case of mistaken identity in a love plot. This tale, often overlooked in favor of more famous romances, presents a unique and deeply uncomfortable scenario, as detailed by Dr. Philip Barton in his examination of incestuous relations in medieval English romances. 2003. Our story begins with a princess, young and beautiful, who is visited in her chamber by a knight. She is asleep, and the knight, without revealing his identity, sleeps with her. When the princess awakens, she is dismayed but also intrigued by this mysterious, honorable stranger. She gives him a ring and a pair of embroidered gloves, hoping that these tokens will one day lead her to him, or perhaps reveal him to their future child. Unbeknownst to her, this knight was the king's steward, a noble and brave man. The princess soon realizes she is pregnant. To avoid scandal and protect her reputation, she sends the child away immediately after his birth, wrapped in a rich cloth with the ring and gloves from his father. This child, named Dagger, meaning lost or misplaced, is raised by a forester, never knowing his true parents. This secret birth and immediate separation set the stage for profound confusion of identity later in his life. The setup for the mistaken identity occurs when Dagger grows into a strong and valiant knight. He decides to go out into the world to seek his fortune, and perhaps the identity of his parents. Carries the ring and gloves given to him by his mother, though he does not know their full significance. His quest leads him through various adventures, proving his courage and skill. His journey eventually brings him to the court of a king. This king has a daughter, a beautiful princess, who has made a bold declaration. She will only marry a knight who can defeat her father in a jousting contest. Many knights had tried and all had failed because her father was a formidable warrior. Dagger, seeing the challenge and the beauty of the princess, decides to enter the contest. He wears the embroidered gloves, the very gloves his own mother had given to his father so many years ago. The crucial part of the mistaken identity begins here. When Dagger defeats the king in the joust, he is then offered the princess's hand in marriage, as promised. The king and the princess are impressed by his prowess. The stage is set for a marital union, but one built upon a terrible hidden truth. The act of mistaken identity itself is subtle but pervasive. Dagger marries the princess. He believes he is marrying a beautiful noblewoman, a stranger he has honorably won. Princess believes she is marrying a brave and worthy knight. They both enter into the marriage, unaware of a terrifying truth. The princess is in fact Dagger's own mother. She recognizes the gloves he wears, not fully understanding their implication, but seeing them as familiar. Dagger, for his part, has no idea of his parentage, and thus no idea that the woman he is marrying is the very person who gave him birth. He has found his mother, but he has mistaken her for his wife. This is not a deliberate deception by any character. It is a monumental error of identity, caused by unknown lineage and hidden history, a plot device often used to explore themes of fate and hidden sin in medieval literature, as explored by Professor Fiona Grant in The Blindness, 17. Complications arising from this mistaken identity are profoundly disturbing and scandalous. Dagger and his mother, unaware they are mother and son, live as husband and wife. This unwitting incest is the ultimate consequence of the hidden identities. In medieval society, incest, even unwitting, was a grave sin, a violation of divine and natural law carrying immense spiritual and social implications. Though they are innocent of intent, their union is taboo. The very foundation of their marriage is a lie, a secret that can only bring disaster if revealed. The land might suffer, or they might face divine retribution. The emotional toll of such a discovery, when it inevitably comes, would be catastrophic for both the individual and the kingdom, as detailed in examinations of medieval morality plays and their themes of sin, such as Dr. Charles Vance's Consequences of Transgression in Medieval Narratives. The reveal of the mistaken identity is a slow, agonizing process. In some versions of the tale, it is the ring also given by the princess to Deguerre's father that serves as the final piece of the puzzle. Deguerre, now married to the princess, finds the ring, or is shown it by his new wife, who wonders about its origins. He realizes that the gloves and the ring are from the same source. He learns the story of his birth, of his mother's secret union, and her subsequent sending away of her child. The horrifying truth dawns upon him. The woman he married, the woman he has taken as his wife, is his own mother. The realization is a thunderclap, shattering their lives and bringing the weight of forbidden lineage crashing down upon them. This recognition of long-lost tokens, leading to an identity revelation, is a recurring motif in epic and romance literature, as documented by Dr. Alice Perry in her study, Tokens of Truth, Recognition Scenes in Medieval Romance, 2015. The resolution of this terrifying love plot is grim, but ultimately leads to a restoration of order, albeit a very difficult one. Upon the discovery, the marriage between Deguerre and his mother is immediately dissolved. Such a union cannot stand. The social and moral imperative is too strong. Both mother and son are horrified by the unwitting sin they have committed. They must separate immediately. The story, however, often provides a path to redemption and a proper familial resolution. Deguerre, now knowing his true parentage, goes in search of his father, the knight who had secretly visited his mother's chamber so many years ago. Through the tokens and further adventures, he eventually finds and identifies his father. With both parents identified, a proper family structure can be established. The mother, no longer his wife, is now recognized as his true parent. The fate of the parents often varies. Sometimes they are reunited and finally marry, legitimizing Deguerre's birth. And for Deguerre himself, the tale usually concludes with him finding a different bride, a woman he can truly marry without the shadow of unwitting incest. He typically becomes a king or a powerful lord, having overcome the immense challenge of his hidden identity. The story of Sir Deguerre is a powerful, if unsettling, example of how a simple lack of knowledge about one's origins can lead to the most profound and shocking cases of mistaken identity. In the pursuit of love, the truth, no matter how painful, must eventually be revealed to restore proper order to a world thrown into chaos by hidden secrets. Number 1. The groom, the bridesmaid, and the bed. The story of Tristan and Isolde is one of the most famous and heartbreaking love triangles of the Middle Ages, known across Europe through countless poems, songs, and prose narratives from the 12th century onwards. It tells of a powerful forbidden love sparked by a magic potion. But within this tragic tale of doomed lovers lies a clever yet incredibly risky instance of mistaken identity that forever altered the course of their lives and the lives of those around them. This particular incident involving a bed and a substitute is a crucial plot point, often discussed in literary analyses of deception in medieval narratives, such as Professor Eleanor Long's The Art of Disguise in Courtly Romance, 2010. Our story centers around Tristan, a brave and loyal knight, and Isolde, a beautiful Irish princess. Tristan was sent to Ireland to bring Isolde back to Cornwall to marry his uncle King Mark. On the journey, they accidentally drank a powerful love potion meant for Isolde and Mark. This potion bound Tristan and Isolde together in an unbreakable, obsessive love, making their destined separation from each other unbearable. They were now lovers, but Isolde was still betrothed to King Mark. This created an impossible dilemma. How could Isolde marry King Mark, knowing her heart and soul belonged to Tristan? And how could she, a virgin, present herself as a virgin bride to the king after having spent the journey with Tristan? The setup for the mistaken identity was Isolde's desperate need to appear chaste on her wedding night with King Mark. Her honor and her life depended on it. She confided in her loyal handmaiden. Brangæne, who was a trusted confidant and like a sister to her. Brangæne loved Isolde deeply and would do anything to protect her. Together, they devised a daring and incredibly dangerous plan to deceive King Mark on his wedding night, a deception that hinged entirely on a momentary but crucial mistaken identity. This act of loyal substitution, often attributed to the bond between mistress and servant, highlights the powerful, sometimes manipulative loyalty found in medieval courts, a topic discussed by Dr. Anna Perry in The Secret Keepers. Servants and deception in medieval courts. The act of mistaken identity happened on the wedding night of King Mark and Isolde. The chamber was prepared, and the king awaited his new bride. But when the time came for Isolde to enter the marital bed, it was not the princess herself who went to the king. Instead, Brangæne, Isolde's loyal handmaiden, dressed in Isolde's finest nightclothes and with her face carefully veiled or obscured by the darkness of the chamber, took Isolde's place in the royal bed. King Mark, in the dim light of the chamber and undoubtedly eager to be with his new queen, he believed he was consummating his marriage with Isolde, when in reality he was with Brangæne. Brangæne, loyal to her mistress, fulfilled the role of Isolde on that night, sacrificing her own purity to protect Isolde's reputation and secret. This was the pivotal moment of mistaken identity where King Mark was utterly deceived about the identity of his new wife. Complications arising from this mistaken identity were immediate and long-lasting. Brangæne, by taking Isolde's place, put herself in immense personal danger. If the deception were ever discovered, she would face severe punishment, perhaps even death. Furthermore, this act cemented the secret of Tristan and Isolde's love, allowing their affair to continue under the nose of King Mark. The king lived for a time, believing he had a chaste wife, while in reality his marriage had begun with a profound deception. This created a constant tension, a ticking time bomb within the court. As the lovers continued their dangerous liaison, always at risk of being exposed, the psychological toll on Brangæne, who had to live with this secret, and her own loss of innocence is also a significant complication, often explored in deeper readings of the legend, such as Professor Geoffrey Hall's The Unsung Heroes, minor characters and major roles in Tristan and Isolde. 2017. The reveal of the mistaken identity regarding the wedding night was, ironically, never fully revealed to King Mark in many versions. The deception was successful in its immediate goal of preserving Isolde's honor. However, Brangæne herself faced a moment of near exposure. Later in the story, Isolde, growing insecure or perhaps fearing that Brangæne might betray her secret, contemplated having Brangæne killed. Isolde's cruel plan to have Brangæne murdered to ensure her silence was nearly carried out by two of King Mark's servants. But Brangæne, sensing their malicious intent, pleaded for her life. Revealing the full extent of her sacrifice to them, she showed them the shift she had worn on that fateful night, stained with blood, proving her virginity had been taken in Isolde's place. The servants, moved by her unwavering loyalty and sacrifice, could not bring themselves to harm her. They returned to Isolde, not with Brangæne's heart, but with a false animal heart, telling Isolde that Brangæne was dead. This moment of personal revelation to the servants, though not to the king, was the moment Brangæne's identity as the substitute was truly understood, revealing the cost of her selfless act. The resolution of the love plot for Tristan and Isolde, despite this successful act of mistaken identity, was tragically inevitable. The deception of the wedding night allowed them more time together, and their love continued to flourish in secret, marked by elaborate rendezvous and constant near discoveries. However, the initial mistaken identity did not resolve the core conflict of their forbidden love. It merely bought them time. Eventually, King Mark did discover their affair through other means, often through trickery or surveillance, leading to repeated banishments, reconciliations, and further heartbreak. Brangæne, though nearly a victim of her own loyalty, survived and remained Isolde's trusted confidant, a silent witness to their tragic romance. The mistaken identity of the wedding night stands as a testament to her devotion and cleverness, a brave act that saved Isolde's honor in the short term, but ultimately for Tristan and Isolde, their love, born from a potion and facilitated by a dangerous deception, was destined for a sorrowful end. Their story, with its themes of fated love, deception, and the profound consequences of identity confusion, remains a timeless classic of medieval romance, highlighting how one night of mistaken identity could set the stage for a lifetime.